This is Ruth Goodwin-Groen here, and I would first like to welcome participants from around the world. It is a real pleasure to have you joining us today on behalf of the Better Than Cash Alliance. We have every region represented. There are over 34 countries who are on the call today, and so we are thrilled to have you joining us. Before we begin, I just want to let you know that you can download the highlights of the case study in English, Spanish, or French on the front page of the Better Than Cash Alliance website. That's betterthancash.org. Some of you may have already seen it in your reminder email, and so those highlights will be a useful reference as we go through the discussion in the next hour. If you have questions as we go, please don't hesitate to write them in, and we will be getting them here and be able to respond to them at the end later in this session. So once again, welcome. Let me introduce our speakers today. And it is our great honor and delight to have Maestra Itrene Espinosa Cantellano with us, who is the National Treasurer at the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit of Mexico since April 2009. What's really important about her joining us today is that she is the team leader for the modernization project of the Federal Treasury, which includes the design and implementation of the Treasury single account. As we will discover, that's very important. And another significant date is that she joined the Treasury in 2007 as the Chief of Staff and later as the Deputy Treasurer. So we are delighted to have you with us. Welcome, Itrene. We also have with us Dr. Guillermo Babatz, who is the author of this study. He's a partner in Atik Capital, which is an advisory firm specialized in the financial sector. And what you need to know about Guillermo is that from 2007 until 2012, he was president of the National Banking and Securities Commission of Mexico. And as head of this commission, he was responsible for the regulation and oversight of banking and securities in Mexico, and also a member of the governing body of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision and of the Technical Committee of the International Organization of Securities Commissions. So we have another heavy hitter in Guillermo. We're delighted you're with us, Guillermo. And then we also have Dr. David Porteous, the founder and managing director of Bankable Frontier Associates, which is a consulting firm that provides specialist research, policy and strategy advice to financial regulators and policymakers, financial service providers, as well as development partners and foundations. He is a payments and financial inclusion specialist. So David, we're glad that you're with us, particularly because you're managing the Better Than Cash Alliance's development results-focused research program, from which this Mexico case study arises. So welcome to David as well. So our session agenda, I hope all the slides are all coming through clearly to you as you're listening to this webinar. You can see we'll have a brief introduction to the Better Than Cash Alliance, including the Development Results-Focused Research Program. We'll look at the methodology of the case, the drum roll on the big case findings, how much has been saved, which is the title of the case of our webinar today, and then look at Mexico's journey to achieve this, and then the next steps that Mexico is taking, and then finally, question and answer session. So please remember, as I said, to submit your questions throughout the session so that we are sure to be able to have great questions at the end, because we will finish at the end of the hour. Also, interspersed during this agenda item, we'll be doing some live polling. And we're going to start off with a test poll to see, for everyone to get used to it, because we want everyone else to know all the different types of organizations that are on the call. So which category does your organization align with most? Are you from a government, from a private sector organization, a company, a business of some sort? Do you belong to a development organization, whether it's a non-government or United Nations? Or are you an academic? Our friends in academia, we're delighted, are with us as well. Or if you want to put yourself in the other category, that's also fine. And the screen will come up, and you can see that we are thrilled to have a large number of, from everywhere. We've got the development organizations are the big number there around the world, as well as lots from the private sector. Great. And the government one is a bit lower because many are sitting in a room with several participants. So there's one line, but several people sitting in. So it looks like not quite such a large number, but there's lots of people listening in from government. So so you can see who else is on the line with us. So we're thrilled that you're joining us today. The Better Than Cash Alliance does three things. We advocate for the transition from cash to electronic payment. And we are an alliance of government and private sector and development partners that are all committed to the shift from cash to electronic payments. And everyone has their own reasons, whether it's cost savings or financial inclusion or better security or transparency. But we all share the same goal of moving from cash to electronic payments. We also provide technical assistance and policy assistance to those who are members and working on that shift. And as you know from today, we develop cutting-edge research products for catalyzing the movement from cash to electronic payments. And a part of our work is the Development Results-Focused Research Program. So David, you want to tell us about that?
Ruth, thank you. Yes. So the Mexico case that we're discussing today is really the first of a series of BTCA case studies, all of which seek to document and to try to understand better the why and the how of different stakeholders shifting from cash to electronic. Obviously, today the focus is on government, in particular in Mexico, but the other case studies coming over the next 6 months will look from the perspective of other stakeholders, businesses and development partners, and we'll look at other regions of the world, Asia and Africa likely as well. The products of the development research program also extend to toolkits, which will take that how question even further. Now, there's a reason why Mexico was selected as the first case study. It's largely because of something that really attracted our attention a while back, which was this ambitious presidential budget decree in 2010, which set very clear and specific targets for the shift process in Mexico. So it seemed appropriate to take a closer look at what had happened, why it had happened, and how. And in that, we were delighted that in the consortium of firms undertaking this research program, Guillermo Babatz was able to do that as a former head of a government agency in Mexico himself and someone with a close perspective on the financial sector in that country.
Great. Thanks, David. And that's a great introduction to Guillermo and as the lead author of this study. And so, Guillermo, I'd like to ask you the sort of opening question of how did you go about answering the question of how much the Mexican government was saving? What methodology did you use in this case study?
Well, thank you. I had the privilege to work with Itrene Espinosa and her team along the whole project. That gave me the chance to interview the people that were part of this change, and then we were also able to gather data from TESOFRE and from government agencies to see how first payments have been first shifted to electronic and then eventually centralized at TESOFRE. So having this detailed database of how payments transform from checks to electronic and then eventually to centralizing those payments in TESOFRE made it possible to calculate the savings coming from this whole effort.
So Guillermo, if I understand, this is the first time this complete set of data has been compiled to show the full extent of the savings. And also, because you were talking to the key players, you really understood the drivers for this digitization and eventual centralization process. So tell us your key findings.
First, what you have in front of you is a slide where we show how centralized payments have reached really high levels in Mexico by the end of 2012. What we show there is that half of the salary payments of federal employees by the end of 2012 were being made through TESOFRE centrally. Most pensions, more than 97% of all pension payments, were also being made from TESOFE centrally, and that's the 146 billion peso figure that is shown in the graph, and then a small portion of cash transfer programs. This means that TESOFE in 2012 made more than 55 million transactions into the final beneficiaries' accounts, salaries, pensions, and even cash benefits on subsidy programs. And this is one of the key issues, the fact that after all the hard work had been done and the infrastructure had been laid, this huge amount of payments in terms of amount and in terms of number of transactions is being made electronically and centrally.
Thanks, Guillermo. So centralization was absolutely key. I mean, Mexico's economy is substantial. It's a G20 country. And so this issue of centralization was absolutely key. But the big finding is how much was saved through the centralization and digitization process. And I think we need a drum roll here. So go for your life. Imagine a drum roll.
Well, the key figure here is that around 17 billion pesos, or the equivalent of $1.27 billion, is being saved every year by the Mexican government so far from the shift that has been made. Getting all these electronic payments happen through centrally from the Treasury, from the TESOFE. These savings come basically from lower fees paid to banks, because if you do it centrally, those fees you don't have to pay anymore. It also comes from the fact that there's less money floating into bank accounts that pay very little returns, so that TESOFE can pay centrally from its account in the central bank, where it has a real return, and then online be able to pay into the final beneficiary account. And then lastly, it also gives much more control, and it reduces payments that shouldn't happen. So this 1.27 billion per year is what is being saved today. It's a very large figure, and this is something that is not over. As we will see later, there's an effort to keep expanding this whole infrastructure, and that should help the government keep saving larger amounts every year.
And I think, Guillermo, that this is 3.3% of the payments that are being made, which for anyone who works in financial services, being able to save that percentage number, I mean, this number is huge in its own self, partly because it's Mexico, but whether you're a smaller country or not, the 3.3% is really quite staggering.
Absolutely.
And so it's come from the salaries, pensions, and some social transfers, and we'll come back to the different sources later, as well as the savings from floats, transactions fees, and transactions that shouldn't have happened. So, but it didn't all happen in one day, did it, Guillermo?
Yes, what we just showed you was like the end result, or what has been accomplished up to now. But this has been a long journey. Let me point you to the timeline that you see now on your screens. And there I will highlight what I think are the most important issues. By the end of 2009, there's a budget decree that mandates agencies to centralize salary, subsidy, and supplier payments in TESOFE. That's the budget decree, the presidential decree that David was mentioning at the beginning. But to get there was a really long effort. It all started back in '97 when President Cedillo issued a decree installing what was called CIAF. And from the beginning, CIAF was meant to centralize payments in TESOFE, and to launch electronic payments as a means to make the payment from government more efficient. There was a lot of work creating the infrastructure to be able to do this, and by the beginning of 2003, the SOFE starts paying suppliers centrally. We don't talk much about this on the paper, but from the beginning in 2003 and by 2006, the TESOFE was paying most of the federal government suppliers centrally from TESOFE. Another big issue happened in 2004 when the central bank, Banxico, launched its automated clearinghouse called SPEI. This automated clearinghouse made it possible to send money from any banking account in the country to any other banking account in the country. And that meant that the SOFE was able to piggyback on this SPEI system, so that by 2008, the SOFE is paying salaries centrally. Another very important issue is that in 2007, a law is passed creating the Treasury Single Account. And this comprises all the legal issues that were needed so that the SOFE would not only have the physical infrastructure, but they would also have all the legal powers that are needed to centralize payments. And then once salary payments were being paid centrally, or part of the salary payments were being paid centrally, there was this big push by the budget decree of 2010, mandating all government agencies to centralize payments into SOFE by the end of 2012. And that gives a lot of momentum to this effort, and that's why we see the pickup in figures in salary payments and in pensions during the last 3 years of President Calderon's administration. And then starting this administration, there's a very big issue because the Congress just passed a law that mandates the centralization of salary payments into SOFE of all primary and secondary teachers that up to today are being paid decentralized. So this will centralize a very large portion of public employees under the TESOFE infrastructure, taking advantage of everything that has happened up to now.
Very exciting, and we'll come back to that with the National Treasurer shortly. Thank you so much. So clearly, there is the drive for the cost savings was the benefit that came to the Mexicans, and so we're going to do a poll now. What is the most important reason to shift electronic payments for your organization? It was clearly cost savings for the Mexicans. Is it cost savings for you? Is security an issue, particularly if you work with low-income women? Is it increased transparency if you have a greater accountability agenda? Or is it financial inclusion? There are obviously others. Just for the sake of this poll, we're just using these four because we're interested in what people's priorities are, and you can see how they're going. Oh, a lot of people are here because of financial inclusion. Excellent. So that's, I guess, related to our development organization partners. So I guess we'll have lots of questions coming in about the link to financial inclusion later on. So that's really helpful. Thank you so much. So we're honored to have with us, as I said, Itrene, the National Treasurer of the United States of Mexico. And so I'd like to come to you now. We've had the overview from Guillermo of the key findings. But from the Mexican government's perspective, why did you decide to start this in the first place? What was the problem that you were trying to solve?
Thank you, Ruth. And first of all, I'm very excited to share the experience of the Mexican case in centralization and in shifting to electronic payments. And of course, I also want to thank the Better Than Cash Alliance. We in the government are not very good at documenting experiences, so this is, I think, a very good effort and something that hopefully can help many other people. And of course, also, I would like to thank Guillermo for a very professional work and study, and we had several interviews, and I think it was very exciting to share with him, and he was able to put all of the pieces in place to have now the paper that we have in front. Going into your question, Ruth, well, the way the government payments were operating by the mid-90s was in a highly decentralized way. The executing agencies had a lot of bank accounts, and they received their budgetary appropriations from TESOFE in their bank accounts, and they decided when to execute the payments and who to pay, and also most of the transactions were made in cash. So there was the need really to be more efficient. It's also important to say, as Guillermo was saying, that in 1997, this was part of a wider effort to put in place a government financial management integrated system, the SIAF. And so this SIAF was meant to cover the whole budgetary process, from planning, budgeting, execution, and accounting. And the Treasury, which is right in the middle of the cycle, this implied to shift from cash to electronic payments and the need to develop an IT platform for payments. But this, of course, having a decree is not enough. We needed several key players and coordination efforts. And so, as you can see, there were many entities and people involved in this. I would like to highlight, first of all, the top-level champions at the presidential level, and that was exactly what happened in 1997 with the presidential decree. The second very important key player is the Ministry of Finance, within where TESOFE and also the Under Ministry for Expenditures, we are within this ministry, and this plays a very important role in terms of aligning all of the different budgetary policies in this same direction, but also within our part in the ministry, it was also very important to have the support of the National Banking and Securities Commission and also from the Bank of Mexico in terms of the infrastructure, the payment system, and as Guillermo was saying, launching and having always a very robust payment system infrastructure, but also in terms of the regulations that were needed over the time to really get to where we are now. And of course, there were several other players like the executing agencies, and within the agencies, the managers of the social programs. Now, on the next slide, we will see how we ended up over time implementing the shift. I would say that we had like two phases process. The first one, it was from the mid-90s to 2003, where we were more concentrated on the development of the IT infrastructure, and we had to have a very rich dialogue with the executing agencies to understand their processes of payment. So finally, in 2003, we had the system, the centralized payment platform in TESOFE, and we were able to start paying them centrally, the federal government providers. And then the second part of the project, I would say, was once we had already stabilized government providers' payment system, we thought in 2007 what was next. So we went and reviewed the international best practices, and we found that a very important tool was implementing a treasury single account to centralize all government payments in TESOFE. And that was what we did in 2007, and the budget responsibility law was amended, and that gave us the muscle, the legal muscle, to start with different actions. So that was the beginning of centralizing, and as Guillermo was mentioning, centralizing was the main source of savings. And in these 6 years, we have worked a lot with the executing agencies, and we had to do also a lot of coordinated effort.
It sounds so great. I love the fact that you talked about the legal muscle. Clearly, there's some issues behind that in your quote-unquote rich dialogue with dependencias. So there'll probably be some questions about how you managed to work with all those different players. So thank you very much. I'd just like to pause and take a poll of our participants, because Mexico started with nothing, so some have not yet started. Then you began, so that some of our participants are beginning. So if that's you, please click on the beginning. And then others are increasing, and some have almost all their payments electronic. And Mexico is not quite there yet. As we noticed, there's still the teacher salaries to go and that sort of thing. So everybody's at a different phase. So the poll is closing right now, and we'll see what has happened. A very interesting mix, isn't it? We've got about a third who are doing beginning, increasing, and almost all. Wow, almost 30%, almost all. That's amazing. And but there's still a small percentage that have not yet started who are learning to see what everyone else has done today. What a great cross-section of people listening in. So there'll be a great cross-section of questions coming in at the end. So think about what the Mexicans have done that will apply in your own context later on. Thanks so much. So Itrene, I'd like to get back to you. Then if you could just summarize for us, what are some of the challenges that you faced and how you overcame them? Because obviously people are at different stages and want to hear your experience from the TESOFE's perspective.
Yes, of course. There were many challenges in the implementation. First of all, as in all the IT projects, it is very easy to go wrong. So what we found was that with time, we found that the IT platform was not very efficient, and we had to replace it. And that was, of course, an institutional challenge. The other one was the resistance, internal and also, but mainly external, from the different dependencias, who felt that their jobs were threatened by the automation and also by centralization. So we had to do a very large effort with dependencias to emphasize that TESOFE would not take their role on the decision of the payment, rather on the execution. So it was, we needed to have a lot of meetings with the administrative offices of the dependencias, and the communication strategy was crucial. Another thing that was difficult to overcome are the labor laws, where the public servants and in general employees in Mexico can choose the way they want to receive their payroll. So that was a challenge, and we had to convince also dependencias to promote bancarization of the public servant. We also thought it was very important to create kind of a system of legal mandates to push enforcement. So it was not only reforms to the budgetary responsibility law in 2007, but we kept on releasing with the help of the minister and also with the National Banking Commission and the Central Bank, several other regulations in order to strengthen our capacity to shift to centralized payments. Also, another challenge was to go more for the convincement and creating consensus around the project, because there was no sense of urgency. Something that is different from other countries. In Mexico, we decided to implement a treasury single account in a context that was not a crisis. Normally, countries do that whenever it's a crisis, a liquidity crisis, so they want to clean up all the bank accounts and centralize the monies, and that sense of urgency makes it easier to implement. So we had to convince, and that's why we also had to go through the process more gradually. In the end, I think that is one of the strengths of our implementation model. And then, of course, the banks, the commercial banks, who are big players in the economy in Mexico, they were not very happy with the project, since they were losing a very profitable business that they were having from float, from bank fees, and so they were forced to be creative, to compete for clients, to create new financial products. So the dialogue and the negotiation with the banks was also a key challenge in the process.
Itrene, thank you so much. There's clearly a lot more behind all of these points, and much of that is explained in the long version of the case study that you can all read from the Better Than Cash Alliance website. Guillermo and I are now going to do a quick summary of the lessons that is in the highlights that you probably have in front of you, but we'll just summarize them for you. So, Guillermo, number one, what's our number one key lesson?
The first one is that a government decree, as we said, is very helpful in creating all the momentum, but this is not a short-term thing. So there's a sustained effort that needs to be made, both by the technical side of the team, but also with a lot of political clout behind the effort.
So the combination of political clout and technical champions is absolutely key.
You do need a lot of infrastructure to be able to do this. And as important as the technical infrastructure and the payments infrastructure, it is the legal underpinnings to do this. So you have to work on those two tracks, the physical infrastructure and the legal infrastructure.
Yes, we often don't remember that both are essential to a coordinated effort. Excellent. Number three?
The third one is that digitizing payments is not enough. Centralizing payments into a treasury single account is key to get the controls and the savings that can be had from this effort. So it's not only electronic payments, it's electronic payments and a treasury single account centralizing them.
We hear the message loud and clear, centralizing and digitizing. So number four.
You have to do this in a piecemeal manner. It's too large of a project, so having stages where you focus on pensions on one hand, on salaries on the other, and doing it on a piecemeal basis is quite important.
Okay, step by step. You can't do it all at once is really an important message. So number five.
Financial inclusion was not the main driver of this effort, but financial inclusion is a byproduct of this effort, and it is a very valuable byproduct, and it's something that the government has a lot of clout to push using its power of all the payments that it has to make.
Yes, the Mexicans are known for their priority for financial inclusion, so that was an important outcome. So, number six.
As Itrene was mentioning, not everyone gains from the shift. So, knowing in advance who's going to present resistance and having a plan to overcome that resistance is quite important.
I think that, we all know if someone's about to lose their job, they get worried, and so it's really important to reassure them in the process. And finally, number seven.
What was very important in some of the cases, for example, in the pensioners, is giving the right incentives to the final beneficiaries so that they are clearly better off receiving the electronic payment rather than receiving their payments either in cash or in checks as they had always had been.
So that's a really important point to end on. And so what we're going in terms of the clients. And so that's the fourth point we've got in the poll in front of us is whether the greatest challenge is the consumer end. So we've picked 4 that come from these lessons, but you may be, so we're interested to know for everyone who's on the webinar, what do you think is your greatest challenge in the shift to electronic payments? Is it a lack of leadership, either political or technical? Is it the infrastructure, whether that's legal or technical? Is it dealing with those who have a stake in what's currently happening and to have to overcome that resistance? So in 5 seconds, we'll close it down. So please take a vote about what's your greatest challenge, and we will close the poll and see what everybody's challenges are. Let's look. How interesting. Again, a very interesting mix. Lots of people do think that consumer education part is a great challenge, but also all the other factors, the technical infrastructure, overcoming resistance, very interesting mix there. Not clearly one over all the others, but fascinating. So there's going to be some more questions for you, Itrene and Guillermo, about this, about these challenges. So Itrene, let me conclude with you then. Tell us about the next steps. We know about what's going to happen with the teacher salaries, and then there are other next steps for you, right?
Right. I think there are clear actions that the new government have pushed for in terms of accelerating and widening the centralization. And that is of course, the initiative that President Peña Nieto sent to Congress and that was recently approved and centralizes the payments of the basic primary and secondary teachers of public schools that at this time were being paid through the federal entities, the states. So this is a huge change in terms of coverage because it's more than 1 million teachers, but it's also a very big step in terms of transparency and of budget control. And that is a big challenge for next year since we will have to work with all the 32 states of Mexico and have the process implemented and have also our systems in shape to be able to do all of these payments. And another very big challenge for the coming years is to expand the coverage of the centralized payments of social cash transfer programs of the government. That is really what means is reaching the poorest of the poorest in the country. So this group, of course, needs a very special attention due to their geographic distribution, but also the lack of financial infrastructure. They are also in areas, remote areas, where there is lack of services like telecom and so on. So that is a huge challenge. And what this means is the need for a much wider coordinated effort of several public entities, even beyond the ones that have been involved in the recent years. We need to involve a specific strategy on consumer education and also the need to implement innovative models to serve this population in remote areas and to be creative. So this will imply a concerted effort and a very challenging task. It will definitely take time, but I believe that the critical mass of government cash transfer social programs are very helpful to start doing kind of pilots and testing new models and also testing the coordination model so that we can then expand to most of the population.
And you want to end on a final positive note?
Yes, I think in any type of these projects, and especially in the shift, it's something that takes time, that takes a lot of perseverance, that takes a lot of convincement. But I think whatever step that you take ahead, it's something where there is no way back, and just keep going.
So that's an encouragement to everyone who's on the webinar today, that you keep going. It may take longer than you expected to, but you'll get there in the end. And especially looking at those further cost savings expecting in Mexico, we're going to have to do an update to this case, I can see, because that's some very significant numbers you've got there. So it's now time to move to the discussion. And the questions have been coming in, and several relate to the how question. How do you get governments to make this kind of commitment? How do you provoke the discussion between governments and development partners and the private sector to be able to see the benefits of this? So, particularly in the Mexico case, how do you get a president to make a decree to get the political impetus behind this? So, first, Itrene, and then Guillermo, would you like to address how do you get this started to generate the discussion about the importance of digitizing and centralizing?
Well, I think it is very important to see the macroeconomic context. There were two presidential decrees. One was in 1997, President Cedillo, with the intention of implementing the CIAF. And I think the macroeconomic context in the mid-90s of crisis and the need to have an ordered public finances is a very important drive to get that, and that was the context by that time. I would say that the context in 2010 was very different. But the government was already very committed to budget and fiscal responsibility, also committed to results-based budget. And so the environment was already in this direction. And another important ingredient in both cases, in the mid-90s and also in 2010, I think was the role of the Minister of Finance. I think the Minister of Finance in all of these cases were people that were respected, where the president would rely a lot of confidence and with a technocratic profile, so that even maybe sometimes the Minister of Finance says no to the president, and the commitment to more higher goals like fiscal responsibility and the results-based budget were very important tools to have this buying in of from the top level.
So many of us, whether we come from development or private sector or within the government, have governments that have the rhetoric of being prudent, of having results-based budgeting, of having effective and efficient services. And so we can use that in our efforts to help to push for a government to make these kinds of changes. Another question that has come in is, how much did it cost? We see all the numbers that we have are not net numbers, they're gross numbers for the savings. Guillermo, did you do an estimate of a total cost? Were you able to get to that number or not?
No, we were not able to reconstruct what the cost of this whole program. I would say that the cost is mostly in terms of the physical infrastructure that is needed. The most expensive part is the automated clearinghouse system, which is a system that in any case seems to be needed for better efficiency in payments overall in the economy, not only for government payments. So I would say that this whole effort can piggyback from the infrastructure that a modern economy needs, such as the automated clearinghouse.
So what you're really saying is that this is just a basic part of the infrastructure for an efficient and effective economy to run in the 21st century, and this is just a sunk cost. I mean, and the benefits you get are effectively the net benefits are effectively the gross benefits because you've already made that investment. So
yes,
thank you. So another question that we have had come in relates to the issue of the coordination and the muscle used. Itrene, how did that the rich dialogue work out, or how did that muscle happen? Do you want to give us a couple of tidbits of how you managed to persuade people to join you?
Yes, of course, the legal framework was crucial, but we also did a very wide work with dependencias. We tried to work with them as a team, first to help them understand the operational implication, but also we had the very principle, from the beginning, the principle of minimizing the inconveniences on their processes. So we tried to implement processes that would not disturb in the way they were used to administrate within the dependencias. We also highlighted a lot of the reduction of costs in bank fees that they would be saving. And we also did like a strategic planning in terms of being able to focus on the communication and on what were the important messages that we needed to highlight with the dependencia. So it was a work of a wide dialogue, an open dialogue, and we had also the benefit of the help of the central bank because they were also very flexible in terms of making any adjustments to the payment system that were needed for the specific needs of the government payments. So it was really something that was our everyday to work together with people and to be able to communicate clearly what was the purpose, what were the benefits, and trying not to disturb too much to the dependencia.
You sound like a great team player. That's great advice. Thank you. And of course, we have a question on financial inclusion, given that's a priority for many of those. So how does this shift, or how has it connected to financial inclusion in Mexico? Guillermo or David, would you like to help us on that question?
I would say that there are two different sectors that could benefit from in terms of financial inclusion. Generally, when you speak about government employees or pensioners, you don't think those people are financially excluded. But in a country such as Mexico, a large portion of those final beneficiaries got their first bank account when they first started getting either their salary or their pension paid into a bank account. So a lot of times, the first banking experience of some of these public employees or pensioners come from the fact that they're being paid electronically, either their wage or their pension. Of course, when you're talking about cash transfer programs, the financial inclusion piece is much more important. And as Itrene was explaining, it is much more difficult to make these payments electronically because of the lack of infrastructure for these communities. So having a drive from the central government to start paying benefits, cash benefits electronically can also have a big impact on on the financial inclusion side of the government strategy. So I would say this might be one of the most powerful sources for government to give a push to the creation of infrastructure that is needed to get those financially excluded people into the realm of the financial sector.
One of the most powerful drivers. That's very important perspective. Thank you, Guillermo. David, did you want to comment?
Well, only to build on what Guillermo said, to emphasize, I think that what this shows is how this type of digitization can be a necessary but not a sufficient condition for financial inclusion. It can kickstart the process, but there's a need to do a whole lot more to build on that, as Mexico is now seeking to do.
Great, thanks. And so we will continue to be joining with Mexico. And do we have one quick question about the social transfers that people want to ask, because that's still being worked on? Is mobile payments one way of dealing with some of those challenges, was one of the questions. Itrene, do you just want to take that quickly, a sneak question at the end?
Yes. Well, we have considered that. It's not something easy to implement in any part of the country, since, as I was saying, there is a large lack of telecommunication in several areas of the country. And actually, we have a very interesting pilot program that was done in a small community in Oaxaca, in Santiago, Nuyo, with satellite technology and mobile phones that created a local ecosystem. I think that's a very good experience, and we are pushing to have that type of pilots in other communities. But it's something that it's being considered, and we will push for that.
Well, I think your motto of keeping going, of persevering, that this is a process is really important in that regard. And so what I want to do then, to conclude, is to thank Mexico very much for sharing this stage of their process, because there's clearly, not everything is sorted out yet, but they've made incredible strides, and they are being very transparent about what they're doing in the future. So, Itrene, thank you so much for joining with us, the Better Than Cash Alliance, for doing this, to Guillermo for your great study. We're really delighted to be able to share it with everybody today. Thank you also to those of you who've participated in the polls and asked great questions. It's been a pleasure to have you on this journey with us today, and we look forward to feel free to continue to pose questions and to engage with us. If you are a member of another government, particularly, who wants to engage with Mexico, please don't hesitate to email us on that. You can also follow us on our Twitter account, of course, as we all do in the social media these days. And please stay connected. We'll be in touch with you about the next case studies that are coming out early in the new year, and more exciting revelations about the shift from cash to digital payments. And with that, I wish I could have a round of applause, but that's not going to work on a webinar. Just imagine it happening, and look forward to staying in touch with you all. Thank you so much.